we don't get back to situations of load shedding. And 2, we're able to secure energy security. And 3, that energy security and in particular electricity, the conversion of the primary sources of energy to electricity must be such that is affordable and in fact is available to all. So that's what we are doing today. We are looking into the future. The second thing that we are doing today is we are presenting this program, an investment program if you come to think of it. The size of this investment program is 2.2 trillion rands. So if you come to think of it in relative terms, the South African economy is 7 trillion rands. We are presenting 2.2 trillion rands of an investment program. So this constitutes 30% of South Africa's GDP. And on the back of this, what we'll be doing is to see that we are able to industrialize on the back of what we are presenting today, so that we answer the questions that have been posed by the 7th administration in relation to the 3 priorities. One is to get the economy growing and get people into jobs. And you know that we have set ourselves a target of growing the South African economy by 3 percentage point plus by 2030. So that's what we had committed ourselves to. There is no economy that grows if the lights are off. There is no industries that will decide to locate in South Africa if we can't guarantee them electricity that is available, that is of good quality, and that is affordable. And for as long as we had had load shedding, industry did not have the confidence to come into the South African economy and make the necessary investments. Even those that had invested in the South African economy, we have seen capacity utilization going down. That is the degree to which they are able to maximize production from their installed capacity has gone down because we were not guaranteeing them sufficient electricity. And as a result of that, they had to resort to laying off people, and that's why you have the unemployment rate that we are having now. So we are presenting to you not just an electricity program, but in fact we are responding to an economic question. So we are presenting to the country a 2.2 trillion rands investment program, and on the back of this we are going to industrialize and get people into jobs. The third thing that we are doing today is that for the first time since the recorded history of this country, especially on the production side of electricity, for the first time now, you are going to see that the electricity that is generated from cleaner sources of energy is going to be greater than the fossil fuels. So your cleaner sources, I'll show you what those are. They include hydro, nuclear, wind, solar. They are going to surpass coal as a primary source of electricity in the country. So the country electricity and energy complex is pivoting, and from now on, once we implement this program, is going to be cleaner than before. So if you like, it's a pivot from greenhouse gas emissions, and we are going to get cleaner and cleaner. But that does not mean that we are going to abandon our strategic minerals, such as coal. And we're going to illustrate how we are resolving that tension of emissions and the fact that we are endowed with coal. And our view is that you don't have a coal problem, you have an emissions problem, and we'll share with you what that is. So what we are presenting to the country today is an integrated resource plan. This is a policy of government, I emphasize. This is not a wish list. This is not a guide. This is a policy of government. This is what is going to drive the electricity agenda in the country for the period that we are going to define. And we are going to ensure that we achieve a number of elements going forward. We're making the point that if you look at the most affluent and industrialized countries in the world, you are going to find that the per capita electricity consumption is higher. What do I mean? That the available electricity and that which is consumed by citizens in those countries is higher, and as a result of that, you can see that they are able to grow their economy. So the point we're making is that if the population grows at the rate at which it's growing, and we are unable to provide for the electricity, that will lead that growth, because electricity must be present before the growth gets into place. and the population is growing faster and people are looking for opportunities. For as long as you are unable to increase electricity production and ensuring that electricity reaches whoever that is in the country and is able to support industrial growth, per capita consumption comes down. That is the rate, the ratio of individuals in the countries relative to what is installed and what they are consuming. When it comes down, it means that the economy is going to suffer. We also know that economics tells us that there's a relationship of the Human Development Index and also the availability of electricity. The greater the per capita income consumption of electricity, the greater the Human Development Index. So what does that mean in short? As an illustration, that a child in a rural village of Garamokgopa, if he or she doesn't have access to electricity, connectivity, it means that we are stunting the ability of that child to achieve academically. And therefore, you are introducing new forms of inequality, that those who have the means, those who are affluent, those who are located in the suburbs, those who are located in cities, that is children of a school-going age who are in school, have got a greater chance of succeeding in life compared to those who are in rural villages. You can mention them in any part of the country. So it's important that they were able to resolve that question. And that question is an electricity question. And that's what we are placing before the country, that we want to ensure that each and every household has got access to this electricity, and this electricity is affordable, and we can guarantee it into the future. That's the point that we are making. So electricity has got relationship with human development. Human development has got a relationship with GDP growth. For as long as there is no electricity, for as long as the lights are off, we are going to undermine the country's potential to achieve its ambitions of growth and ensuring that we are able to attract the necessary investments, and then that the people of this country are able to grow at levels that our potential dictates. So that's what we are resolving now. It's not just about the megawatts. It's much greater than just the megawatts on the grid. We are constructing a story about how we are going to get the South African economy back on its feet. And we know that we are going through an exceptionally difficult period as a result of, amongst others, and chiefly really, electricity, what you and I refer to load shedding. So what does the IRP do? What is it that we are seeking to address? So essentially what the IRP does is a living plan. By a living plan, I mean we make these announcements. You'll find that there are technologies that we have not incorporated in this IRP. We have not incorporated them because, amongst others, we don't have a sense of what is the unit cost of providing that electricity, conversion of that energy source into electricity, using that primary source of energy. So science is still resolving some of these questions. A typical example, you will see that we are not accounting for green hydrogen as an energy carrier, because science is still resolving the cost of that, the unit cost of green hydrogen. But the IRP does acknowledge that as a country, we have determined a path of where we want to go in relation to green hydrogen, but we have not incorporated it in the IRP because we are still resolving those questions. Once science has helped us to resolve those issues with regards to the unit cost, the kind of investments that are being made, and we're able to bring down the unit cost of hydrogen, we'll incorporate it. Then we'll update the IRP to take into account these new energy carriers or sources of energy that gets to be converted into one form or the other, and they are able to give us electricity. And once we get that in place, then we'll be able to, from time to time, adopt update the IRP. And that's why we are saying it's a living plan. The cabinet has determined what these parameters are, and that's constitute a policy position. And within those parameters, we are able to make the necessary adjustment. I've made the point that primarily what the IRP seeks to do is to ensure security of electricity supply. So we know that the 1997 and the like, the engineers presented before the leadership at the time to say at the rate at which we're connecting new people onto the grid, the projected growth of the South African economy, we're likely going to run into a scenario where what we are generating is not sufficient to meet what the demand is. And in fact, you might get into a situation where you have to curtail, if you like, people's requirement for electricity. So you are going to have unserved electricity in the country. Of course, we did very little and decided that the market is going to resolve that question. And of course, now we stand here. We have been experiencing bouts of load shedding, the most intense and sustained in 2023, because we didn't in part take that guidance. And now what we are saying is that the current administration has taken that guidance. We are going to be deliberate and intentional in ensuring that we achieve conditions of energy security, and this country will never again be subjected to load shedding. So that's what the plan seeks to do. And we say that as we do that, it must be able to balance supply and demand whilst optimizing the environmental impact and the total cost of supply. So we have a duty as a country that those energy sources must not have harmful effects on the population in this country, in particular those who are in the immediate vicinity of the footprint of this generating capacity. So it's important that we are able to protect those communities. So in the mix, we take that into account. It's an important part of our obligation, not because we have signed to some agreement, but because we've got a constitutional obligation to protect and enhance the livelihoods, including the health of the people of this country. And that's why that is covered also in the IRP. And then the total cost of supply. So I did say that load shedding had devastating impact on the South African economy. So I'm not talking about the unit cost of the energy source. What is the cost of not having electricity, that cost to the South African economy? That's something that they were answering. And of course, in this instance, we are looking at what is the cost associated with choosing one energy source over the other in relation to expansion of the grid and all other questions that requires or begs an answer. So that's what we're answering, not necessarily what is the cost, the unit cost of a particular energy source, but what it means to the complex in general. South Africa, as I stand before you, is pursuing a diversified energy mix. We've got nuclear, we've got coal, we've got renewables, we've got hydro, but that complexion is going to change. There's going to be a structural disruption to that complexion of the South African energy mix, and I'll share with you what the IRP has to say about that structural interruption of the energy mix in the country. And of course, what we are doing here is not novel to South Africa. We know that major European powers are going the route that we are taking, or they've gone the route that we are taking. And in the course of doing that, they also answer the question, what is in the best interest of their respective economies? So before you answer the question of what is our obligations and contribution to a global agenda, first we've got a primary responsibility to answer the question, how does this intervention take into account our domestic circumstances? And as an example, our domestic circumstances means that we are coal endowed. So you can't just relinquish coal as your source of base load, but you also accept that the emissions requires attention. And we'll illustrate to you how we're able to resolve what appears to be an inherent tension between the exploitation of coal and also the reduction of emissions. So like I said, we want to achieve a security of electricity supply. We want to talk of load shedding in past tense. We want to ensure that when the president and cabinet says we want to grow the economy by 3 percentage points, that in fact we've got sufficient supply to support that growth. And that supply must be available now so that growth can follow. The economy doesn't grow and supply comes later, because it's an enabler of that growth. So we're making sure that at every material point we've got sufficient supply. And this supply must be able to absorb the shocks. So if there can be, you remember during bouts of load shedding, we came before the country and said there's a cluster of units failing, and as a result of that, it has reduced our capacity. We don't have enough headroom to accommodate the demand, and for us to address that shortage, we have to initiate load shedding. So this security of supply is such that even if we've got multiple units failures, whether on the ESCOM side, on the private sector side, we must still have sufficient electricity for the economy to continue to operate. We don't subject our people to darkness or to load shedding. And then we want to minimize the cost of electricity to the economy. One of the big conversations now is the affordability of electricity. So we can say whatever we want to say about sufficient supply, for as long as that electricity is not available, it means that our people don't have access to this electricity. It means that industries will not be competitive, and as they lose the market share, they must put people out of jobs because the operational costs are such that they are not able to sustain them because they are losing market share. So it's important that we are able to minimize the cost of electricity to the economy. And as I said before, we'll come with that plan on how we are going to address that. And the other one is the environmental impact, as I've mentioned before. What is the complexion of the South African energy mix as I stand before you? So the installed capacity in megawatts terms, not necessarily what is available at any given time. In megawatt terms, 58% of the mix is coal. Just reinforcing the point I made earlier on, that indeed, as I stand before you, we have an energy mix in the country. 10% of the mix is rooftop PV, and you know that as part of our energy action plan as announced by the President, one of the 5 outcomes of that is to accelerate rooftop solar solutions. And in fact, you will see that going forward, we also have an ambition of increasing rooftop solar solutions. So because in many instances, others argue that you don't have load shedding because of rooftop solar solution. No, we've always made the point that we need the behind-the-meter intervention. You know, National Treasury even incentivized rooftop solar solutions so that we're seeing it as part of the mix, not as an isolated incident outside the deliberate intentions of government. And then we know that there's solar PV that is grid connected, that constitutes another 10%. And this is thanks to the bid window exercise run by our IPPO office, the public procurement of new generation capacity coming from the private sector. And you will see that the issues around wind, solar, PV, nuclear, or those energy sources are going to be increasing exponentially as we go into the future. 8% of our generation capacity is coming from wind, 4.5% from diesel, and really this is our peakers, and then 4% is on pump storage, and 3% is nuclear. Of course, you'll see that these numbers don't add to 100% of the mix. The remainder, which is about 3 percentage points, really, it's a small interventions on hydro there, biomass there. They are too small for us to accommodate this in the comprehensive picture, but we do acknowledge that they play a role. So we have a mix, and I'll share with you that in terms of the plan we are placing before the country that cabinet has adopted, we are going to reconfigure this plan going forward. So what are we introducing between now and 2030? We are going to introduce about 11,270 megawatts of solar PV. So just put this into context. I mean, what ESCOM, the installed capacity of ESCOM is about 50 gigawatts or 51,000 megawatts. So this is the solar PV between now and 2030. The additionality of solar PV will be approximately 20% of what the ESCOM is today. And then we are going to add a wind. Between now and 2030, we are going to add wind of 7,340 megawatts. Again, if you put it into context, you are talking about 15% of what is installed by ESCOM now will be coming from wind just between now and 2030. And then our gas-to-power program of about 6,000 megawatts. It's a big part of our intervention because we need the base load, But we also need to address what I call the suppressed demand. So we know that we're talking about the gas cliff, us running out of the gas molecule, the molecules by 2030. We need to make an intervention on how we're going to replace the base load that will be taken out in 2030 must be replaced by an equivalent, if you like, energy source that is able to give us base load, and that's the gas of 6,000 megawatts. You know, the IPP office has already gone out on 2,000 megawatts of gas to power. It's an important part of the conversation because this 6,000 megawatts has to come in place by 2030. So it means that if you think of it, the procurement is very tight, given the long lead times of this equipment, given the fact that you need to contract, you need to secure the molecules, and given, depending on the solutions that we are going to take, the regasification facility, Richards Bay or wherever the location is. And then 3,100 megawatts of storage and 5,400 megawatts of distributed generation. And then the other point, you will see that we are not making any mention of coal here. We're not making any mention of coal here. I'm talking of new generation capacity and or even extension of life of existing infrastructure. Because the point we're making is that there's a litany of clean technology solutions that are available, clean coal solutions that are available. What the IRP says, it instructs ESCOM to say that we must go into a clean coal technology demonstration plant, and that we must see the results by 2030. So that having domesticated it to our own conditions here at home, we'll need to have an appreciation of the efficacy of this solution to the South African environment. It could be working in other parts of the world, but of course the parameters get to change when you move from one geography to the other. So what we are saying is that ESCOM has to do that demonstration plan, and on the basis of those results, then we'll be able to know what constitutes that mix going into the future. And then we take it beyond 2030. So cumulatively between now and 2039, what is it that we are adding? Now you see there's an appearance of nuclear. Nuclear is a big part of our conversation. Nuclear we're building 5,200 megawatts of new nuclear capacity in this country. I have made the point that the state will not prevaricate. The state will ensure that we are very deliberate, we are transparent in the manner in which we are going to procure this clean energy solution. And nuclear, I want to say to the country that is a big part of what we'll be doing. Again, we can see that solar PV is going to be a big part of the mix going into the future, and then that's an additional 25,000 megawatts of solar PV. Wind, another 34,000 megawatts of PV. Gas now ramps up to 16,000 megawatts going into the future, 2039, and then storage, 8,500 megawatts, and the distributed generation, it's 16,000 megawatts. So what are we saying in a nutshell? In a nutshell, we are saying the IRP 2025 says between now and 2039, we are going to add 105 gigawatts or 105,000 megawatts of new generation capacity. Again, let's put it into context. It means we are going to build ESCOM 2.5 times between now and 2039. And that's why we're making the point about the single or the biggest investment program of a post-apartheid era is what we are presenting to the country today, and to ensure that we are able to achieve energy security. And we say that in addition to this 5,200 megawatts, we think that there's an opportunity for another 4,800 megawatts of nuclear. But that will be supported through our nuclear industrialization plan, so that we are able to participate in the entire value chain. You know that we have hemorrhaged the skills, the scientists have left as a result of us not building any new nuclear program. They have left because we have placed the PBMR program at Pelindaba, at Nexa, under care and maintenance, and they are all over the world. So it's important that that industrialization plan also answers the question, where are the skills going to come from, or how are we going to generate the pipeline of skills going into the future? Let me make the point that the biggest risk to us not achieving this IRP lies in two areas. The first one is the skills pipeline. We have not built any major program, infrastructure program in the country. It's isolated. It's just, we have done the Soccer 2010 World Cup. And the next biggest interventions we made was Medupi and Kusile, and nothing of significance in between. So it means that the skills that are required to support this program are in short supply. And that's why we'll be engaging with the universities and the TVETs, especially on the engineering and the built environment and the issues of nuclear. The second risk that sits here is that our industry has been decimated. Historically, we have had the big 5 construction companies. I think now we're only left with one. If we are going to ramp up this build program, in addition to other interventions that the Minister Chris is making in transport, Minister Tau is making with regards to the SEZ, we are likely not to have an industry that is positioned to take advantage of these opportunities. And that's why we'll be sitting with industry to see how best they can ramp up their capacity and capability to meet the demands of this program. Of course, the assurance they'll want from us is that we are not going to do start, stop, because they want see-through going into the future for them to make the necessary investments that are going to support this program. And that's why this is a big part of the intervention that we'll be doing. That intervention is not sitting in the IRP. It's in support. It will be an addendum to what is it that we are going to do to ensure that the IRP comes into life. So the issue of skills, the issues of industry is something that is going to receive our attention. And then as we go to the next slide, just to make the point that, of course, there are doubters about our ability to prosecute a nuclear program. We have a history in the country of a nuclear program. We are the only country on the continent that has got 2 active reactors of nuclear to power. We've got the third one that is for multi-purpose research reactor, which is at Pelindaba. The Egyptians are building 4 reactors. It will give them 4,800 megawatts of nuclear power, electricity generated from nuclear. Of course, they are going to surpass us on the nuclear to power. But we've got that history, and of course, we've got an extension of life of Kubek unit number 1. So we're capable of going into this area. And like I said, we have stopped the momentum, halted the momentum of new build, and that's why I spoke about the skills, that's why I spoke about the industry. So we are confident that we are going to get it right. And that's why we say that we need to put in place a nuclear industrialization plan. So it's not just about converting nuclear energy into electricity, it's about what is the benefit to the South African economy. What are the components within the nuclear fuel cycle that we can domesticate or localize? And that's the conversation we're having with the scientists, and of course, from a policy point of view, Minister Tau, and then we'll come out and share with the country what are those components that will be localized. Globally, there's a trend of going nuclear. There's a new realism, just an admission that nuclear is a big part of the mix. We have seen it at COP28, which was held in UAE in December of 2023. Over 20 countries committed to tripling the contribution of nuclear energy by 2050. So we're not alone. And I can tell you the majority of these 20 countries are in the industrialized north. So that I think others, they say we must seek validation from what the industrialized north is doing. And I'm confirming that if that's the way that we measure ourselves, then we're in good company, that these countries are going in that direction. So anyone who denies, who rejects nuclear as a solution is just denialism and just a rejection of what the evidence suggests to us, what science is saying, and this is the route that we are taking. And now we have seen that one of the issues that comes about is, but can it be financed? 14 of the world's top financing institutions have committed that indeed they are going to finance nuclear going into the future. So we're not just restricted to a boutique or a small grouping of finance institutions. It's much bigger than that, and therefore what allows us is a degree to negotiate what is the cost of building that nuclear capacity over a period of time. The SMRs are which is the modern technology that underpins nuclear technology. We've got over close to 100 of those that are at different stages of feasibility. Of course, very few of them will go to into commercialization. But the point we're making is that the world is looking in this direction. And of course, given our history with nuclear is going to become a big part of this. And of course, you know that there's a site that now has been approved for EIA. EIA has received a green light, 4,000 megawatts that we can build tomorrow on that site. Of course, all of these things add up to really make the case that we are ready for this nuclear program going into the future. A big part of this IRP is that it's predicated on an energy availability factor that continues to improve, and in fact, it's sustained at levels of about 66 to 68%. So we need to ensure that Eskom is stable. The energy availability factor of Eskom now, in the past month, we've been averaging above 70%. Just to put it into context, when we're at the height of load shedding, we're at about 48%. The team has improved it by over 22 percentage points, and now we're in good space. That's why we can have this conversation with the lights on, not explaining ourselves about load shedding, but looking into the future and how we can avert load shedding and ensure that we achieve energy security. So it's a big, big part of this conversation. And that's why I always make the point that Eskom is a battery of the South African economy. If the private sector fails in their by transaction, they are going to revert back to the grid. And that's why Eskom must always have this capacity that is available to rescue and sustain the South African economy going into the future. And that the energy availability factor is a big part of it. And then we also admit the point I made earlier on, that we've got our duty to the environment. We have approved the NDC. Minister George will lead the delegation going to Belém in Brazil. We have committed to a range of the NDCs, and we are not deviating from electricity's contribution to the reduction of the greenhouse gas emission. So we are projecting that emissions of approximately 168 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030, and it will decline further to about 142 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2035. So you can see the trend line is coming down. So that is our commitment. As we achieve energy security, we are able to ensure that we don't have missteps in relation to our commitment to the reduction of emissions. So you can do both. It's not a binary conversation. It's about doing all of the above, including that demonstration plan that Eskom must do, show the result by 2030. If we are in the right place, then we know that we can continue to run this coal-fired power station to give us, if you like, the kind of stability that is required, and we are able to maximize on our endowments. I've made the point from an economic point of view that this is a 2.2 trillion investment. This is about 30% of South Africa's GDP. We really need to change the conversation. If we succeed within this, it means that there has to be industries that are built on the back of this direct, and there could be induced employment and industries that will support those that are at the coal face of driving this IRP. And that must result into jobs, and that must lift the South African economy. And that's why what we are sharing with you is that it's not just an electricity program, it's an economic problem to ensure that the priorities of the 7th administration are met, including that of reducing poverty and the cost of living. Once we get people into jobs, we're addressing poverty. Whilst we're addressing the cost of electricity, is a big part of household consumption and production of industries. Then we're addressing the issues of the cost of living. The emissions are also coming down. So this is the point that we're making, that we're moving in the right direction. We're securing the future for posterity. So we don't want to commit the same mistakes as above, as before, and leave our posterity, future generation, to resolve the issue of supply not being sufficient to meet demands and and therefore undermining their ability to grow and meet their own expectation. We have a duty as preceding generation to resolve challenges of future generation, and that's what the IRP does to ensure that we achieve energy security. So in numbers terms, what does this mean? So you remember I said at the beginning, in megawatt terms, coal was 58%. So once we complete this program by 2039, coal will be 27% of total generation capacity. But in megawatt terms, it will be 40,960. Like I said, I mean, it's a relatively small decline from what is installed. What makes the share of coal lower is because the share of renewables is increasing exponentially. And wind, you remember that I said now as I speak to you, is about 8%. By 2039, wind will be 24% of the mix. I said earlier, as I speak before you, solar PV is 10% of the mix. By 2039, solar PV will be 18% of the mix. I did say gas. We don't have any gas to power solution, but by 2039, we have built a gas program that is going to be 11% of the mix. And then we had said nuclear is about 2 or 3%. Because of these interventions we are making, nuclear then surges to 5%. And of course, there are other smaller ones that I will not mention here. But the point I'm making, the energy mix of the South African economy has pivoted. What comes from greenhouse gas emissions is now going to be halved. So from 58% now is going to 27%, and then the mix is becoming greener and greener, but that does not subtract from us continuing to exploit coal as a part of our solutions. I did say the energy availability factor should be above 60% for us to be able to support the plan, because it makes that the assumption. The gas to power, we've made the point, and then we said that for the 6,000, the load factor of gas should be about 50%. And of course, the IPP office has adjusted that. They've out on the market for 2,000 megawatts. We have adjusted it to ensure that the load factor is at 50%. And then I made the point about the demonstration plant. We'll develop the nuclear industrialization plan. We must ensure that there's effective monitoring so that for us to get the real benefits of this, people must be into jobs, we must build industries, and we do that on the back of our renewable energy industrialization master plan, what in short we refer to as SAREN. So it's a deliberate industrialization plan on the back of the IRP. And then one of the things that will come out in public is a consideration of a mega bid window. Part of the problem with the previous bid windows, we start and then there's a hiatus, we are quiet. And then we start again, then we are quiet. Industry is unable to build capacity. There's one firm that was located in Atlantis, the SEZ, they've closed. They were manufacturing some of the components on the wind side. They've closed because we start, stop. So we want to a continuous, uninterrupted program to ensure that we are able to build industries on the back of what we are doing. Like I said, as I conclude, we are going to achieve energy security. We shouldn't be talking of load shedding, something of the past. We're talking security, we'll talk affordability, we'll talk access, we'll talk competitiveness of the South African economy. Like I said, it's a 2.2 trillion rand investment in the South African economy, and the trend line from emissions is coming down. And that's the case we are making to the South African population, that indeed we have turned the corner. That now we're talking about growth, we're talking about industrialization, we're talking about new skills, we're talking about resuscitating industries that have collapsed, and this is a program that is going to help us. It's not just the lights being on, it's about building a future for posterity, future generation, so that they are able to inherit a South Africa that is in a better shape from an employment point of view, from an industrialization point of view, and the size of the economy, so that they are able to realize their ambitions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. With that, ladies and gentlemen, the Minister and the team here in front of us are ready to provide any clarity that you may seek. And therefore, the floor is open for questions from members of the media in the room, after which Vanessa and Takalani will take us through the online questions. So by a show of hands, we'll stick to our established protocol where you introduce yourself and the media house you represent. We'll start with Mr. Yelland there, and then Antoinette. Any other hand in the room? The third one is Lindelo. Any other? And then Vanessa, you'll take us through after these 3 questions. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Gillen from EE Business Intelligence. Thank you indeed for the media briefing and update today. Can I please ask the Minister, when will the IRP 2025 be gazetted in the Government Gazette so that we can see the details? A few other questions, if I may. Has any modelling been done, and is this detailed in the IRP of the price path, the electricity price path going forward based on the IRP plan? Another question, you indicated a number of funders around the world will fund nuclear build. My question is, without government guarantees from the South African government, will such funders fund nuclear power in South Africa? And lastly, please, is the 6 gigawatts of gas with a 50% load factor by 2030 realistic? My information from the gas sector is that this is very far from being a realistic plan in terms of 6 gigawatts, 50% load factor by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoinette Slavat. I'm a freelance energy writer. Minister, could you just clarify what exactly you mean when you refer to distributed generation? And then when do you expect the mega bid round to be put to market? And in that same context, you referred to the construction companies, the big ones that have closed down. And part of that was due to Competition Commission penalties. Now, I'm not saying the conduct of the companies was correct, but when such a big construction drive comes along, there needs to be some coordination for the sector to be able to deliver. Will you engage the competition authorities and maybe get an exemption or something along those lines? And then I just want to make sure the 7,060 megawatt of nuclear, is that conventional? And then what about battery storage? Is the storage that you refer to, the 6,300, is that battery storage, and is there enough battery storage in the plan? Thank you.
Thank you.
Minister, thank you so much for the presentation, and I know we're looking forward. I'd just like to bring us back to right now, in terms of how we're looking for the end of the year. Any risks of us going back into load shedding? How are our plants looking? Just, if you could give us just an update on how we're looking for the festive season into 2026. Thank you.
Thank you. Vanessa, will you take us through online questions?
Helmo Kraus from Independent Media. Has South Africa submitted its nationally determined contribution to the United Nations? Terence Creamer, Engineering News. What policy adjustments have been made to this gazetted plan when compared with the least cost IRP? And why does Cabinet believe these to be justified? How much will these policy adjustments cost electricity consumers relative to the least cost plan? For how long will the 50% load factor be sustained for gas? And could you elaborate on the flexibility you're planning to build in for the future gas load heat factor? Those are all questions from Terence Creamer. Tamar Khan from Business Day. Can you clarify how much nuclear energy you expect to generate from the revived BPMR program? And provide some detail about when you expect it to commence. and how it will be paid for. Tokonola Lehana from Full View. Does the IRP make sufficient mention of the proposed strategy for electricity supply industry reform, or how electricity supply industry reform and unbundling of ESCOM are expected to affect electricity supply and demand planning? Does the IRP address municipal non-payment, ESCOM debt, or electricity tariffs, despite them having effect on both electricity supply and demand? Is the greater collaboration between DMRE, DFFE, and your department, including Treasury, considering the implications of the IRP on the focuses and interests of the different departments? That's all we have for now.
Thank you for all of those questions. We'll get responses. We'll start with the team, and then the Minister will round it up.
Yes, good afternoon. So we'll start with the question from Business Intelligence, just focusing on the gazetting. So we will be gazetting the detailed plan by this coming Friday. So starting tomorrow, the process is already unfolded. We expect the publication in the Government Gazette by Friday. The 6,000 gigawatts, 50%, is this realistic? From procurement point of view, I think 2,000 is already out in the market. This leaves with 4,000 that we believe other processes, because not all of it will be procured from the IPP office. We have other state entities also running the process. We believe that by 2030, possibly there could be delays on commercial operation dates, but procurement definitely would have started and projects will be construction phase. I'm going to leave some of the questions for my colleagues when they come up. Perhaps on the 7,000 of nuclear. So we currently have 1,800, right? And the 7,000 is a cumulative, right? If you add the proposed new capacity of 5,200. And when you look closely at the timelines, we've built in the typical long lead times that it takes for nuclear to construct. And hence, by 2030, you saw in the presentation that there's 0 megawatts of nuclear. However, there's going to be, procurement will start now, but the COD date is expected to be beyond 2030. So our anticipation is that by 2039, we should have a cumulative capacity of nuclear of 7,060. The battery storage, correct, it's included in the storage that you saw. There are other forms of technologies. We're not only focusing on battery storage, and hence we phrase it generally as storage, but within that we have battery storage. Minister, I think I will stop here and allow Mr. Damba and Dr. Mate to take some of the other questions.
Thank you very much, Tabang. Good afternoon, Minister. Good afternoon, members of the media. I'll cover some of the questions that are raised, and I'll call upon Sonabo Damba, our specialist in modeling, to cover some. The question of modeling of electricity price path, it was outside the scope of the IRP modeling. This is going to be dealt with separately. You may have heard the ministers talking about it, that we're very concerned about the cost of electricity going forward, the different efforts that the department is currently busy with to address that issue. The nuclear funding and what guarantees are going to be provided, I'm going to skip that question. I think the minister will deal with it at the tail end. Is gas by 2030 realistic? As far as the IRP planning is concerned, we still believe that it's still realistic based on the progress that have been made so far. The Minister spoke about what the IPP office is currently busy with. Of course, there are risks. The supply risk, the securing of the gas itself, the infrastructure, there will always be risks. But at this point in time, based on the modeling that has been done, we still believe that 2030 is achievable. Then Antoinette asked the question around what is included in distributed generation. Mr. Damba will deal with that question. The issue of the mega bid window, I'll leave that up to the Minister and the IPP office to respond to that. Engagement with the Competition Commission to avoid disrupting the construction market. I think I'll also leave that to the Minister at the end to respond to. The nuclear technology options that are considered, Mr. Damba will also deal with that in more detail, but at this point in time, the modeling does not differentiate whether it's conventional or the SMRs. The SMRs are not ready. So, but when the time comes and they are ready, they will certainly be considered. But at this point in time, the assumption is that it's conventional, but Mr. Damba will respond to that. The storage, what is in the storage, predominantly battery energy storage, but there may be other storage technologies that can be considered. So the plan makes it open-ended, so we can consider other proven technologies that can be considered for storage. And then Slindelo, what's going to happen during the festive season and leading up to 2026, I think I'll leave that question to the Minister and ESCOM to respond to. Then the questions online, it was a bit difficult to follow through, but let's try and recap the independent media. Have we submitted the NDC targets for the country? I think that's a question for DFFE more than for the Department of Electricity and Energy. But we do know that the proposed NDCs post-2030, they are currently being consulted, seeking public inputs towards that. But in terms of when or whether they've been submitted, I think DFFE are probably in a much better position to respond to that. What we have done in the IRP modeling is to align with the proposed targets, where possible, of course. The Minister spoke about what we are projecting in the IRP up to 2030, and what we're also projecting up to 2035. The IRP is projecting 168 by a million tons of CO2 equivalent per annum by 2030, and the NDC targets, I think it's 145 if I'm not mistaken. So there is that delta, and we have consulted with the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment to align around that. Then policy adjustments. What policy adjustments have been made? I think we'll elaborate on that. It's in the document. The Minister started talking to some of the policy adjustments that have been made. For instance, the issue of the 50% or 51% capacity factor for gas to power. We are also saying we need to invest in clean coal technologies, doing a demo leading up to 2030 so we can get data and accurate information to determine what's going to happen with some of our coal fleet going forward. The Minister spoke about nuclear, what is the policy statement around nuclear, and I'm not going to repeat that. He also emphasized the issue of EAF, energy availability factor. As part of the policy statement, it is now stated that EAF has to be, as a minimum, has to be 60% or above. If it drops below 60%, then we start having challenges in the system. But the full details of the policy statements will be articulated in the report itself. The future capacity factor for gas to power, I will leave that to Mr. Sonabo Damba and the IPP office to respond to that. how much nuclear to generate and when. I also leave that to Mr. Damba to respond to. Then the issue of electricity market and the unbundling of ESCOM, how does that talk to the IRP? I think I'll leave that to the Minister to respond to at the end. And then the last question I noted, it's the collaboration between the DMPR, not DMRE, DMPR, DEE, Department of Electricity and Energy, and DFFE. And I started indicating some of the collaboration around the NDC target settings and making sure that where there are differences and gaps, we have a clear understanding in terms of what are those differences and how do we close the gap going forward. Let me call upon Mr. Damba to come and add to some of the questions that I may have missed. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, let me just deal with the question on the adjustment that were done on the lease cost and or adjustment that were done to come up with a final plan, as we now call it, the IRP 2025. So you will remember that we've studied about 5 scenarios, and these scenarios were intentional. You know, we did not just construct scenarios for the sake of scenarios. Like, we constructed scenarios that were appropriate and relevant to the South African power system because we understand it and we know it. So those scenarios looked at, amongst other things, obviously you have a lease cost, that's your departure point. And then because of what we saw to be expected around 2030 with a shutdown of 8 gigawatts of coal-fired plant, we then constructed another scenario that looks at what would be the risk should that, when that happens. And because there's gas, the minister spoke about it, the 6,000 megawatts of gas, CCGT, combined cycle gas turbine. So the mitigating option that we studied was what then happens should that gas program be delayed. So it was one of the scenarios. And then we've studied other scenarios like, you know, what happens if you bring nuclear into the mix, and so that we can understand the merits of having nuclear into this energy mix. And then the last one was because PV, utility scale PV particularly, was not necessarily favored by the optimization program. So it was not coming up, especially post 2030. The primary reason is because, you know, rooftop PV, in terms of characteristics, performance characteristics particularly, is similar almost to utility scale PV. So that's why it was not favored, plus also there's competition, especially during the day when the sun is shining, when you're expecting generation from PV. So what we then thought is, like, in order to boost the performance of PV, utility scale, let's reduce the battery costs, because, you know, we know that if you create a hybrid between solar and battery, then, you know, the operation of such a hybrid option improves, meaning you can store during the day and then generate, you know, when the sun is set. So all these scenarios that we've studied, you know, provided us with insights, right? And obviously we've costed them, as you may have seen in the draft presentations and the reports that were published by the department. And then, so those insights were useful for us then to say, what happens then? How do we then craft an adjusted plan that will then, you know, serve the South African power system best? So when you look at the cost of the different scenarios together with those emission trajectories, like, you know, CO2, NOx, SOx, which are local emissions, particulate matter as well, we then created now this plan that basically takes all of that into account, because we know what are the strengths of the different technologies in the mix from the studies that we've done. After having scored, you know, those scenarios and created a ranking scale from 1 to 5, those that performed better were scored at 5 and so on. We then created a final plan, and this plan, when we put it together, it was a plan that will reduce emissions the best but whilst not compromising security of supply, right? And then when you look at the nuclear scenario, it was one of those scenarios together with the gas at risk, right? So ultimately, we then formulated the plan that the minister spoke about. That actually is one of the most diverse, but the costing of it compared to the least cost, or what we call the reference case, so to speak, because our least cost is not just in terms of rands and cents, it's a least cost that is also adequate, so to speak. So when you compare the final plan, IRP 2025 final plan, with the least cost, because that was the question, you then realize that the cost differential between the two, the total net present value costs of those two plans are not that far apart from each other. So as a result, that gave us confidence that this so-called policy adjusted plan that was approved by Cabinet is not going, though it will reduce emissions drastically, but providing security of supply, it is not going to be overly expensive, so to speak, compared to your least cost. And that is how that was derived at. And then another clarity on transmission and distribution, maybe not distribution, we can talk about the transmission. So as part of a strategy from the department, the legislated part of the IRP is the generation expansion part that the minister presented on. However, compared to the other IRPs where transmission detail was not taken into account, and when ministers issued determinations, procurement, even though you had developers who were ready, right, and the money was available, but then those projects could not close because there was not grid available, especially in the rich resource areas like the Cape areas. So we've decided that the strategy for this IRP would be 3 volumes. The volume 1 is the one that is legislated, that has got the generation expansion plan, and the volume 2, which is currently in progress, is the one that basically does the analysis of the transmission that will then support this IRP plan. So that one is currently in development. Together, once we've done that, the volume 3 will then be another one that deals with the operability of both the generation, the grid, right, so that the system operator on a half-second by half-second basis is able to operate the South African system reliably. So yeah, that's as much as the transmission is concerned. And then the other questions, really, if I look at it, that are technical, I think they've already been spoken to. That battery is not, so the storage that we speak about is not only battery storage, it's there's pump storage in there, but also at the time when procurement is required, then the best solution can then, whatever options are chosen can then compete, and also the transmission, the volume part, the volume 2 part of it, which is the transmission development aspect of it, can also determine if further storage is required, not for the energy arbitrage like we do in the generation expansion, but also for grid support. And then the last one is nuclear conventional. It's not only conventional nuclear that we've looked at. We've looked at several options for nuclear. You've got PWR, SMR, like the minister was mentioning. So it's going to be a combination of those, but obviously, like the minister was saying, the nuclear industrialization plan will then determine what will be the best strategy to actually implement nuclear in the country. Thank you. What is in that? The distributed generation is an easy one. So rooftop PV, anything that is behind the meter, such as rooftop PV and the likes, is what then would constitute what we term distributed generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. Maybe to Helmut, on the NDCs, yes, on Wednesday, Cabinet approved our position in relation to the NDCs, so Minister George has taken them out for public participation, came back, and Cabinet ratified our range. And the range we ratified is not different from the one that we had taken out for public participation, because a lot of the issues that were raised on the public participation exercise, at least on the account of Minister George. We're dealing with the implementation side. And I guess the secondary question, so they've been endorsed, and that's what Minister George is taking to Belém. And then what the team had done, as Dr. Martin indicated earlier on, was to say that what the IRP is doing is fitting itself inside those targets. So electricity accounts for 42% of the emissions or so that we made sure that we remain within the broad parameters of the NDC. So it's a position that was canvassed with the DFFE, so we're able to find each other. And then on the issues of the penalties, of course, Antonio, you do qualify that the penalties imposed by the Competition Commission on the big industry players on account of collusion, which was confirmed. That's why the penalty was imposed. Collusion during construction of the stadia that hosted the Soccer World Cup. You do make the qualification. That's not the only reason why industry collapsed. If you were to ask me, that's a small matter. Industry collapsed because there was no sufficient build program. So there was no demand. And as a result of that, they folded. If there was demand, they will meet their obligations in relation to the penalties, and the economy is growing, we're building, the infrastructure space is growing. Then there will not be companies that folded. In fact, we would have seen more and more companies coming into the space at that level. And I'm not suggesting that there are no industry players. Please don't get me wrong. I'm talking about that level of a build program. So you really need certainty from the industry point of view. I mean, you have to look not further than what our gross fixed capital formation, which is a proxy for investments. It's supposed to be at 30% of GDP. We're at 14.9% of GDP. And that's why the economy is not growing. There's nothing of significance to build. And that's why industry is folding. And if we were to resuscitate this, we are confident that industry will come back. Of course, it will take a bit of time for industry to come back. And then on the issue of the megabit windows, yes, so they were conceptualizing that. So that's an assignment that we have given to the IPP office. But really the point is the following. Whatever we choose to call it, there has to be certainty on the procurement program. We can't start the bid window, adjudicate, then quiet for 2 years, then come back into the market. It won't help us. Whether you call it a mega big window, whatever labeling we give to it, all I'm saying is that it must be a seamless and predictable procurement by public sector of private sector generated electricity. So once there's that certainty in the market, then I think we should be able to build industry on the back of that. And that's what the IPP office is doing. I mean, if you were to look at the success rate, we have not really achieved what we wanted to achieve with regards to IRP 2019 from new generation, from private sector. Of course, there are objective constraints, the grid and the like. As you know, we've gone out to the market to address the issue of the grid. Of course, I should have made the point earlier on that another risk to this program is the TDP. Of course, the next round when we come out, we will be, amongst other consideration, is to direct people to locations where there's capacity. Of course, there's a premium you pay because the efficiencies are not as great as you get from the coast, like Northern Cape, Western Cape, and Eastern Cape. We'll account for that. And then as we build the new corridors, I think we'll then in later procurement processes, then we'll be able to match grid capacity and new generation capacity. So we're going to be deliberate in how we do it. So the TDP could be a stumbling block to this. Of course, when we go out, like I said, the next round is to match grid availability with new generation. So we're going to be that deliberate so that we don't stunt the program going into the future. On the issues, Slindile, is that, no, we're in a good space. I mean, when we announced the summer plan, we did say that the only time you'll have conversations about the possibility of load shedding is when the total amount of failures, it's 15 1,000 megawatts. We are at 10,000, 9,000, so we are far from that. That's why I'm saying we speak with confidence that we can place load shedding. Talk of it in historical terms. Of course, what we must resolve is the issue of load reduction. So the long and short of it is that now we're confident going into the festive season, as you call it, and early next year. We're confident about the supply side. There are no issues. If any, the only problem we have is that we are generating more than we can consume. And it's a good problem that we want to have because that allows us to resuscitate the South African economy, and that's why we can have conversations with the smelters on what are the kind of concessions we can give to them so that they open the smelters. So we're in good space, I must make the point. And then on issues of Lehana, no, the IRP doesn't go into the areas of whether people can pay, whether people are delinquent, illegal connections and the like. It's a separate conversation. And as I've made the point, I mean, we updated the country on the interventions we are making when ESCOM announced the results, and I'll come back to update. We announced our plan to end load reduction, and a big part of that is to ensure that we deal with illegal connection, leakage, and also technical losses. So that's not addressed by the IRP. The IRP is a product of a broader canvas in government. So all departments, not just petroleum resources, not just national treasure, everyone. That's how the system of government works. So it starts with the officials, the DG cluster, all DGs, including the DGs of provinces. They sit in the meeting, they interrogate what I gave you. Then they bring it to the minister who sponsors a report, a submission to cabinet committees where all the deputy ministers and the ministers are present, so that we must also get the benefit of contribution by deputy ministers. Once it's done, then I take it to cabinet, and this is what we have. So it's a product of engagement across all of government. And then on the issues of the nuclear build program, we have appointed a panel. The panel is working with us. We'll answer all these questions with regards to the financing and the like, but we're going that route. I think that's what is important. So we're giving that certainty. And then when we come to the procurement process, you remember that part of the issues that as a part of the Section 34, when I consult with NERSA, I would have answered the question of cost and all of that. So you're going to get it there. When we made that submission, of course, it will be public. So we're confident about that. And then on the issues of the load factor, so we did on the gas side, adjusted for these 2,000 megawatts that were already out in the public on 50% load factor. On the flexibility going forward, yes, it's a conversation we'll have with the IPP. So we're talking about the 6,000. Beyond the 6,000, then we'll talk of different load factors. It's a function of discussion, and that we have not resolved. What we have resolved is what must come in by 2030. The observation is correct that there's a big risk on that. Of course, I mean, industry players, it depends, the nature of the conversation. There's an issue around the readiness of the receiving facility. If you take Richards Bay for the facility to receive the molecules and regasify, there are timelines there. There are timelines associated with the turbines. They tell you that the lead times is 3 to 4 years. So there's a big risk there. We do admit, and that's why we need to conclude this quickly. Of course, we build a safety net on what happens if this 6,000 doesn't come back. So we build a safety net. We don't just leave it there and say, yes, 6,000 we have failed, and therefore the lights must be off. We do account for what needs to happen. Some of the options that are before us, so there's that 2,000, and then we know we have 4 pickers in the country. We have Khoriko, we've got Ankerleg. We've got the IPP ones of Didiza and Avon. One of the conversations that the mandate we give to the IPP office is to negotiate with the pickers to see if there can be that conversion. Of course, we think they get there quicker because already they are operating, their licenses are in place. You might have issues of servitude, how ultimately you land the gas there, but it's quicker than any other option. So we have a sense of what needs to happen. Once we have concluded those discussions, we'll come back. But I think the observation is correct to say that we are really cutting it thin. I mean, it's just close for comfort, 2030, with regards to this 6,000 megawatts. On the policy adjustment, I spoke about the issue on the demonstration plant, the ESCOM one. I spoke about the 50% the load factor on the gas one to enable gas to proceed. We spoke about the nuclear industrialization plan is sitting there. So yes, those are the policy adjustments that we have put in the IRP going forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Minister and the team. Colleagues, will take the last round of questions for any further clarity. By a show of hands again, Vanessa, please be ready to also take us through the online questions. There's Chris again. Antoinette, any other hands in the room? After Antoinette, we'll go to Vanessa. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Chris Yelland again. May I say I was quite surprised to hear that no price path modeling has been done, because I would have thought that an IRP is really predicated on the price path. And the Minister made the point that unless electricity is affordable, the plan is kind of meaningless. So to have a plan in which the price path has not been considered or modeled is quite surprising, I must say. But perhaps you could comment on, how realistic is an IRP plan that does not consider the price path and the affordability of electricity going forward based on that very plan. Another question, if I may ask, the nuclear procurement was said to have to start now in order to have the first the nuclear capacity delivering by 2036, which is what I understand the plan to indicate. We do not know what PBMRs or small modular reactors are going to cost now, because they're not available as a product and we don't know what the prices are. That leads me to imagine that the procurement that is going to start now for 2036 is going to be based on pressurized water reactors, large PWRs. Is that assumption correct? Or are we going to wait several years before we know what's going on with PBMRs and small modular reactors before we start the procurement process? Because there's no point in the procurement process for products that don't exist or are not proven yet. And lastly, if I can ask, the question on distributed generation was said to be behind the meter generation. Does distributed generation include or does it not include wheeled power, traded power from one geographic area to another geographic area, or is wheeled power included in the figure given for distributed generation? Thank you.
Thank you. Because I just want to clarify, this is the final plan, no more public participation or anything like that. You could just clarify whether that is the case. I think will there be public participation on the volume 2 and volume 3, and when do you expect those volumes to become available for comment or in a final form? Then you refer to the nuclear site. Do I understand correctly that that is Bainenfontein or Kuba? That's all.
We have 5 more questions online. The first 3 are from Terence Klima at Engineering News. While the difference is said to be small, please could you still provide the model cost differential of the final plan versus the least cost plan, and also provide the factors that raised the cost of the final plan? Could you provide a breakdown of the technology cost assumptions used for the IRP 2025? The centralized procurement of new generation does not appear to be aligned with the emergence of a South Africa wholesale electricity market. In light of that, when will a new market-oriented approach to procurement be implemented instead of mega procurement rounds? Janice Q from Bloomberg has 2 questions. How will the 2.23 trillion be funded? Last question, when we speak about nuclear, does that include reviving the modular nuclear reactor program? Those are all the questions.
Thank you again for all of your questions. We'll take a similar format where the team will respond first and then the minister will come to the podium.
Thanks. I will start with the question on distributed generation. So the point we're making here is the location of the actual generator. The manner in which it's transported to end use is not part of the consideration. So long as the generating plant is behind the meter, will fall within the category of distributed generation. The volume 2 and volume 3, the work is at advanced stage. We expecting that before end of March. So volume 3 is on transmission, volume 2 is on system operations. Together, all of these will be published by the department before end of March next year. Yeah, the modeling ones and the cost deltas, I think my technical colleague will address those. The last question I want to address is the centralized procurement, which does not align. So IRP does not say who's going to procure or where the procurement will take place. And this is the discussion we had at NETLEC. So IRP balances supply and demand. Who procures is a decision that the minister makes. Up to so far, we've been procuring through Section 34, and the IPP office has been playing that role. There is nothing stopping the minister from procuring differently. The technical team has to look at supply, demand, projected into the future, and what are the technologies to meet that. How that unfolds is a decision that the minister makes, as he is empowered to do so. I will allow my colleague then to answer the other technical questions. Thank you.
Yeah, on the question of the cost breakdowns of the different technologies together with the benchmark costs of the final plan compared to the other scenarios we've studied. I think when the IRP is gazetted, what generally happens, and it will be done, so all the sources of information will also be published with it. There are cases where we've basically processed the costs. What we've done this time, which we've also done during the stakeholder engagements, is also to provide the workings in Excel format to show how we've processed such information. So all of that will basically be shared or will be published on the department's website when the IRP is gazetted. And then the last one is on the price path. I think it's a key point that you raised, Chris, on the price path. But what we've seen is that based on the closeness, for example, like I said, if you look at the total NPV cost of the different plans, they are really within a very small range of each other. So there is not a vast difference. Obviously, we could argue that, when you have technologies that have got high upfront capital costs, like nuclear, in those scenarios, your cost structures might be impacted differently. But overall, over the 50-year horizon, which is the study period, we've seen very little cost difference between those plans. And I think this is basically something that may warrant, that will definitely warrant, like a former colleague has said, a separate study to be done just to ensure that, this actually the mathematics check. So that will be, it will be done that way. Yeah, and then, I think that's more or less what I can take from the technical questions. Thanks.
Good afternoon to all the members of the media. I thought I should just address the question of the issue of siting for nuclear and the PBMR technology in particular. The PBMR technology is what we have started with from long ago. It's our own South African technology for high temperature gas cooled reactor. We are looking to revive it, and soon Minister will be tabling in cabinet for a decision to lift this from care and maintenance. The idea is to transfer this technology from ESCOM to NEXA, so that NEXA can take it from the technology readiness level that is required up to a demonstration plant. We are not only going to look at small modular reactor from the point of view of PBMR, but rather we're going to look at the entire spectrum of SMRs, and this will include the PBMR. As to the allocation, I think Mr. Tabang answered that question to say the 5.2 gigawatts that is envisaged for new generation of capacity for nuclear is not technology specific in terms of conventional pressurized water reactors vis-a-vis small modular reactors. This is a matter to be addressed later. We'll then agree how do we break it down into specifics. And of course, on the siting, ESCOM has been, over the past years, engaging in siting for the country, for nuclear power plants. We have currently obtained a record of decision for the environmental impact assessment from the DEF department to the tune of 4,000 megawatts approximately. And this will be at Dinofontein, which is alongside the Quebec nuclear power plant. There will be efforts going to the future for ESCOM to apply for more sites. That will include the Thyspen site in Eastern Cape. I think they call it Oyster Bay, 100 kilometers west of Port Elizabeth, or shall I say Kaweja. Thank you. I thought I should address those two questions. Thank you.
Just to Antoniette's question, now we have consulted extensively. This is a culmination of that consultation process. Remember that we're ready to take the IRP to cabinet, and I requested the team to go and engage with those parties who have made substantive submissions so that we don't interact with them through correspondence, but we're in one room, and we gave those parties an opportunity to interrogate the model, the kind of questions that they have been asked in a much more detailed fashion. So we workshop this across the length and breadth, and now we have sufficiently consulted. This is a policy of government, and as Thabang has made the point, it will be gazetted by end of this week. It will be gazetted. There was a question, how will this be funded? No, all of this is an off-balance sheet intervention. There's no money that the state is taking out to fund this. And that's the point I was making earlier on. It's just the levels of investment in the South African economy suggest at least the NDP should be 30% of GDP for us to achieve the aspirational targets of the GDP of the NDP, and 2/3 of that 30% must come from private sector. So here we are then directing the private sector where these opportunities are. Of course, President will announce, Minister of Finance, what is the public investment, but this is really, it's an instrument to guide the private sector on these opportunities, as we are seeing now. Outside this, you know, the work we have started on the transmission side, request for proposal, qualification clause, do proposal. They are going to fund, and those lines will be concessions. So the 2.2 trillion an off-balance sheet funding. Of course, there might be instances where you might burden the balance sheet from a point of view of guarantees, which is a contingent liability. But there's very few and far in between. Of course, depending how we're going to procure nuclear, perhaps that situation might be different. But the point is that it's not the state that is funding, will be an off-taker. Then the last point to raise is a fundamental point, although I think Thabang answers the question. So one of the biggest pitfalls of the past, and we have learned from that, was when the technocrats were saying to the powers that be at the time that, look, at the rate at which consumption is growing, driven by new connections to households, and the projected growth of the South African economy, you might have a problem of supply in the future. The answer was that the market will resolve the problem. The market does not resolve the problem. We are not about to make that mistake. We have announced the policy, and everyone will procure according to this policy. We will not follow the market. We will lead the market. The state will never relinquish its responsibility to lead our quest to ensure that there's energy security. That's the role of the state, exclusively the state, and then the others will participate to help the state to achieve that ambition. But we are not going to follow the market. We have determined this is the framework, procure, this is how we're going to do it. A large part will still be the IPP office. And of course, Eskom will compete with everyone, and I'm confident that Eskom will get a fair share of what is before us without undermining the rules of competition and transparency. Like I said, Eskom is the battery of the country. When everything fails, these transactions fail, collapse, everyone goes back to the grid. So the Eskom must build that, if you like, sufficient buffer to ensure that when everything goes wrong, is a supplier of last resort. That's the role that Eskom plays. And Eskom must be rewarded also for that, being a supplier of last resort. That's how it works. So it can't be that a transaction happens, people can't fulfill their obligations in terms of that transaction, and they say, oops, let's just call on Eskom to draw this megawatts. And Eskom is expected to have this additional capacity that is idling, waiting for someone to call on it, and is not rewarded for that. No, that's the name of the game. I want to, when I say we level the playing field, there's no bias to Eskom. It includes being rewarded for being providing that additional capacity to protect the grid and also the transactions that have happened there. But the big point I want to make, and this is where I conclude, is that the state takes the lead. We are not about to commit the mistakes of the past and say the market is going to resolve the problem. When the market has not resolved the problem and there's darkness, the state is incompetent. We are not going to do that. We're going to solve this problem. The state is going to take the lead. That's what this plan is doing. So let me take the opportunity to thank you for spending time with us on this Sunday. Wish you a blessed Sunday, whatever is remaining of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, and the team once again. Colleagues, we've come to the end of today's media briefing. Once again, indeed, thank you for honoring our invitation.